Hi everyone, it's Gerald with you again, Grand Seiko guy, and I had a request from a collector to talk about this reference. I say reference, this is a single reference even though we're looking at two watches here. This is the 4522 7010 from the 45 GS series. This was introduced first in the 1970 Volume 2 catalogue and was not actually on the market for very long, although it's not the rarest of vintage Grand Seikos. In fact, it's quite a nice sort of starter piece for many people. It was only ever in 3 catalogues, so as I said, it debuted in 1970 Volume 2 and it made its final appearance in 1971 Volume 2, so really only on the market for possibly a year, 18 months or so. And it was available for 32,000 yen, so very much at the cheaper end of the range. The pricing on vintage Grand Seikos is fairly consistent. The automatic movements are pretty much always priced at a premium to the manual movements, and references with complications such as date or day date. Obviously also you get typically a 3,000 yen increase for each additional complication, and then finally, obviously depending on the case metal, where cap gold would always be at a premium to the steel that we see here. This reference 4522, because it's the 4522 movement which has the date function. There's also available as a 4520 in the same case, so that's without the date. But what you'll notice, the keen-eyed of you will notice, is that there's actually a difference between these two watches. The watch on the left is the one that's actually pictured in all the catalogues, and you'll note that that watch actually has on the dial under the GS logo 3 lines, high beat 36,000, and then the Daily Sakosha logo, whereas the one on the right is missing the 36,000 text, and the high beat text is actually a little bit smaller as well. So the watch on the right doesn't actually appear in any of the vintage catalogues, and if it weren't for the existence of a photograph of this watch in the 1971 May issue of Seiko Sales, we really wouldn't know whether this watch was legitimate or not. But fortunately we do have that issue of Seiko Sales. It's a very interesting issue. It shows quite a number of watches. I think there's probably half a dozen or more vintage Grand Seikos in it, and lots of other references from different parts of the greatest Seiko range as well. And the watch it's interesting because the watch is actually pictured next to what superficially is a very similar watch. And let's just pull in a scan of the page from the catalogue now, and we see in the bottom right page, the very right hand most watch is the 4522 7000 without the 36,000 text. Next to it you can see a watch that superficially looks very similar, which is the 5645 7000, and that watch, you'll note, obviously is the automatic based on the 56 movement. And it's interesting to note the significant difference in price between these two watches. There's 2 prices given underneath. One on the 56. First of all, it lists at 40,000. That's for just the one with the calendar, GAC Grand Seiko automatic calendar, and the GAW, which adds the weekday function, as I said, is an extra 3,000 yen. Whereas on the right-hand side, we see the 45 listed, and first of all is listed the watch which is pictured, which is the 4522 at 32,000 yen, and then underneath it gives the price for the watch that doesn't have the calendar function, which is the 4520 at 29,000 yen. So you actually would have been paying an additional 11,000 yen which is almost another 30% on top of the price of the 4522 to get the equivalent automatic watch, which was the 5645 as we mentioned before. Looking back with hindsight, I think it's pretty fair to say that these days the 45 series Grand Seikos are significantly more desirable than the 56, just in terms of the movement. There are some very interesting 56 series references that people are interested in, mainly because of the case design or some other aspects, the dial colours, things like that, and we've covered some of these ones before. But it is very interesting to note that significant price difference to get an automatic reference where the movement was sort of more on a production line, sort of robotically produced rather than the handmade and hand-finished, hand-regulated 45 that we see on the right. These days, obviously, the 45 is much more collectible, particularly because of the 36,000 beats per hour movement. And indeed, the 4520 movement was also used, of course, in the Seiko Astronomical Observatory chronometer. So these really are very good movements indeed. So I just wanted to show you these two. I'll be listing both of these on the website after this video has uploaded. So the links to those listings will be in the description below. Note that we do actually have another example of the 4522 7000 already on the website. I keep saying 7000, forgive me, it's 7010. 7000 is the one with the sort of turtle shaped angular dial. Sorry, 4522 7010. But what I want to do now is just look at each of these individually and also show you the studio video where you can see a lot more detail on the watches, and just to discuss the particulars of these two watches. So I'm just going to pause the video and move one of the watches out of the way, and then we'll talk about them. Okay, so first we'll take a look at the example that was only ever in the May 1971 issue of Seiko Sales. So that's the 4522 7010 without the 36,000 on the dial, which would indicate obviously the beats per hour of the movement. And what should be immediately obvious from looking at this, even in this video, and we'll run the studio video in a moment, this watch is in absolutely exceptional condition. In fact, this watch is pretty much new old stock. It has a couple of swing tags still attached. I've not taken these off. We've got the little swing tag here that has the reference number, and then a swing tag with high beat on it as well. And there really isn't an awful lot to say about this watch in terms of the condition, other than the fact that it is absolutely exceptional. It has a very slight scratch on the bezel, which you can see just above the crown. Let me just grab a pen so I can point that out to you. There's a slight scratch on the bezel there. But apart from that, this is in fantastic condition. The dial is absolutely immaculate. The handset is perfect. The case is untouched. We can see here the original brushing on the case. You'll notice little black specks near the crown. The reason for those will become evident in a moment. Excuse me, but yeah, basically absolutely superb condition. If we just turn it over, we can see that it still has what I believe was probably the original case back protection sticker on it. You can see there's a slight blue tint. The case back protection sticker, you can see there's a little bit which is worn away. So we have a perfect medallion, pretty much unscratched case back. And the reason for those little black spots that we see everywhere, and on this case back as well, if I can move some of them off, is that this actually still has its original, excuse me, this still has its original strap. Now, some of you might remember, if you've watched an earlier video where we had another watch with its original strap. Now, these straps do not, on the inside, survive the passage of time particularly well. And the original black, I don't know how they would have made this, but whether it's the polish or whatever, just basically flakes off. You can see all these little dots all over the material that I've got the watch on. Is all coming off the strap. We're not going to replace the strap. We'll just pull it down to the other end. We can see it still has the original buckle on it as well. We're not going to replace the strap because sometimes people like to buy these watches not to wear, but actually really sort of as I guess what we call safe queens. So rather than replace the strap, we'll supply this watch with this strap, and then if the collector who purchased this decides they want to use it, then obviously actually wear it, then they'll, I'm sure, remove the strap, because that would not be very nice against your wrist, and you're going to be absolutely covered in little bits of material if you do try to wear this. So as I say, not a huge amount to say about this watch, other than you will not find a better example of this anywhere. So that's the first one, and now let's take this out and we'll look at the second example. Okay, so the example with 36,000 on the dial, we just have this on a generic strap. This is showing signs of wear and tear. If you look around the edge of the dial, this is quite common, where the edge of the dial sort of starts to scrape away. Whether that's been done, I suspect that's probably happened over the course of several services over the lifetime of the watch. So we can see some wear at the edge of the dial. It's not as noticeable, obviously, when you've got this on your wrist as it is when we're looking in this very high resolution, these high resolution videos. And also the case. I don't know whether the case has actually ever been polished, with a machine, but I think just general, this watch has clearly been worn a great deal over the years, and so the case, which obviously has originally that brushed finish that we saw on the first example, that brush finish has worn away quite substantially, but it's still a very, very nice example of the watch. The case back is very clean. We can see this was actually from I think that's 04, so that's April 1970 that this watch hails from. So a well-worn watch, but a well-loved watch. I think really in very, very nice condition. What I want to do now, I just want to run the studio video for this one, just to point out. There's much more evident in the studio video. Let's just run it now. You can see the spotting on the dial. I think the video in the studio video really does show every single possible flaw that you might expect to see on the watch, including some little dings on the upper left lug that we saw there. Here again we can see the spotting mainly on the right hand side of the dial, but that's nowhere near as evident in regular light compared to the very high intensity, high contrast lights that we use and processing that we use on the studio shots to really show off the watch to its fullest extent, so you really get a very, very clear understanding as to how the watch looks. So that was the studio shot for the second one. Now what I want to do is let's just maybe just bring these back just so we can compare the case finishing. If I show them side by side, I'm not sure whether this is going to work or not. Yeah, so you can see there the untouched brushed finishing on the new old stock, pretty much new old stock version on the right, and on the left hand side we can see the watch, which has had a lot of wear over the last sort of 49 years or so since it was made, whereas the one on the right is untouched. But what I forgot to do just on the mint one, we can see that's from July 1970. So only 3 months after the one on the left. So it's interesting that over the lifetime of this watch, they actually changed the dial, even though it was only on sale for a year or so, and presumably only in production for a similar amount of time. Let's just run the studio shot, the studio video of the mint version, because this really is where, as I said, that any flaws really show up in these videos, and this is when you can just see the absolute impeccable quality of this piece. I mean, that incredibly crisp edge there on the case with the original brush finishing, very, very nice. I think the crystal is pretty much immaculate. Almost zero signs of any spotting or aging on the dial at all. And coming round to the other side, really a similar story. Obviously it's got you can just see the strings from the tags, a few little black spots from the strap that have not brushed off. So there you go. So absolutely immaculate. On the website, we'll also have the beauty shots, the still beauty shots. So we'll just have a look at those now in the video. But do check the website to see these in more detail. You can open them up in another tab and zoom in and really get a very good understanding as to the quality of these pieces. Obviously the one without 36,000 on the dial is going to be substantially higher in price than the 36,000. I think these make great starter pieces for people looking to build a Grand Seiko, a vintage Grand Seiko collection. They're very much in demand, particularly obviously because they do have this interesting case design, which is really. We think about the grammar of design that is obviously heavily featured in the marketing these days of Grand Seiko. I mentioned before that really the 44 Grand Seiko was the only vintage piece that actually ticked all the boxes. I think there's 7 boxes in the Grand redesign in terms of the details on it. I think it's fair to say I don't think these watches tick any. You know, we have curved brushed case, we have very thin black hands, black minute hand and a black hour hand, black in the middle, and a very, very thin second hand. We don't have markers with you know, very highly polished facets. So it's interesting that the Grand redesign really only seemed to last for about a year in the vintage era on just the 44, and then we start to see a lot more variety in the references coming into the end of the 1960s and then into the 1970s. Apologies for the noise in the background. The next door neighbours are obviously cutting their grass, so that's probably a good point to stop this video. As I said, please do check out the links to these watches where they're listed on the website for sale, which is in the description below. Thank you to the collector. Forgive me, your name has escaped me, but thank you for the collector who asked to have a look at these, because I do think it does make an interesting comparison. And as I said, we've had both of these sat for quite some time prior to putting them on the website, so it was good to give us an excuse to get these 2 listed, and especially obviously the one that's in absolutely mint condition. There really is a piece for sort of high-end collectors who are looking for the absolute best of the best. You will not find a better example of this watch. You could look for another 3 years, I suspect, and you wouldn't find a better one than this. Okay, thank you for watching, and we will be back again next week, and we'll find another watch to list. If you have any specific requests, we do have a lot of watches in reserve that haven't been listed yet, as I mentioned a few times. If there is a vintage Grand Seiko that we've not shown yet, that you would like us to shoot a video on and list and get on the website, do let us know, and mention it in the comments or drop us a message on Instagram, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you very much.